95% of the universe is supposedly dark, invisible matter and energy. Physicists have been searching for it for 90 years, never found it, still insist it's real. Let me show you a pattern. Dark matter, dark energy, dark flow, Donnie Darko. But wait, Donnie Darko is a movie starring Jake Gyllenhaal. It's not a part of the dark sector of physics at all. Well, it's about as legitimate as dark matter, because we have no proof for Donnie Darko either. As inherently absurdist and silly as adding Donnie Darko listed amongst the elements of the dark sector is, I do so to point out how silly the dark sector is. Artifacts of our finite perception. How do we know they're real? How do we know they exist? Simply because a curious scientist one day decided that he wanted to try to run Einstein's equations with 5 dimensions instead of 4. The laws of electromagnetism emerged from these equations. And what does this tell us? It tells us electromagnetism, as we see it in the 3rd dimension, is merely just an artifact of our 3rd dimensional perception on something that actually exists in a higher state. In this case, likely the 5th dimension. So we didn't just get the laws of electromagnetism out of it. We got the notion that our perception is likely very heavily artifacted by our existence as a finite 3-dimensional being. Imagine there is an object right out of view. Say it's in your peripheral, but not quite in your peripheral vision. But it casts a huge shadow, and you see the shadow. You become convinced the thing is the shadow, because that's all you can see. The true object lurking right outside of your field of view. And that is just simply the nature of our existence as 3D beings. We know there are things outside of our realm of perception, and we have evidence that our perception is highly artifacted by our limited scope. And yet, more conventional thoughts in physics cling to the material, that it could be understood, that it could be quantified, that the technology's not there, that we just have to discover the right particle. Meanwhile, that same physics discovered that our perception's highly artifacted due to our 3D existence. Both of these things cannot be true. And it's not just the 5th dimension and the laws of electromagnetism that show us. Our perception of time itself and its flow is highly artifacted. How do we know this? Time dilation is one way. We have to literally adjust the internal clocks of the satellites that orbit the Earth because the tiny bit of difference in gravity makes the clocks fall out of sync with the surface. And that would completely mess up GPS and a lot of other functions. We know because the quantum eraser experiment shows signs of retrocausality, the measurements of the present affecting states of the past. And yet, how does our artifacted 3D perception perceive time? Flowing linearly from past to future, even though we know that's not true. It's just an artifact of our perception. It's just that big cosmic shadow that we can't help but gawk at and think is the real thing. So how does the notion of artifacted perception reframe the dark sector, dark matter, dark energy, dark flow, and our good friend, Donnie Darko? Oh, Donnie, you're such a card, moving all the things around in the universe in ways that we don't understand. What a little trickster, casting a shadow so big it appears to be 95% of the universe. But probably just a trick of light. So the thing about gravity is, we don't fully understand it. We see the artifacts that it leaves behind, that it seems to correlate with mass, that it does have an effect on the passage of time. But we can't unify it with the other forces. We can't unify it with the quantum. And often, on larger cosmological scales, our models for gravity, based around mass, fall apart. Context is everything, and being willing to alter one's perspective when given new context is of utmost importance. The context. We measured the movement of galaxies, and they don't line up with our math for gravity. It breaks the equation. So, what would be the more logical thing to do in that scenario? To reevaluate whether the equation is actually accurate, or to invent a variable to make the equation work? A variable that we can't detect, a variable that we can't see, a variable that requires us to invent a bunch of other variables to justify its existence. So we invented dark matter. We couldn't accept our equations being fundamentally wrong. So we invented dark matter, Donnie slyly smiling at us from behind the cosmological curtain that we can't see as we gawk and chase shadows. And this wasn't just some small shadow in the math. This wasn't some tiny bug in the equation. This was an inconsistency so bad that we had to invent a variable that added another 85% of all matter. But we can't see it, we can't detect it, and the only way our math is detecting it is through these gravity equations. However, we know these gravity equations can't be unified. We know our understanding of it is incomplete. And yet, we gawk at the shadow. The darkest thing about the dark sector is just simply the fact that it is a shadow of our finite perception. Instead of accepting that we just don't understand how gravity works, we invent, very much likely, things that aren't even there. We have no way of proving them beyond obviously broken equations, fundamentally flawed math, and artifacted perception. If that didn't seem nonsensical enough for you on the surface, let's truly dissect how nonsensical this rabbit hole actually gets, because it's actually fairly impressive. Dark photons, another variable invented to patch the equation. A patch for a patch. For they suspect that if dark matter is able to carry force between itself, photons must be doing that. Dark photons that we can't see. That patch, though, requires further patches, creating a true patchwork of patches to patch the holes in the math. Dark quarks, dark gluons, dark bosons, darkinos. Yeah, darkinos. A patch for a patch for a patch for a patch. But here's what I postulate in this series of patching framework. If we can't detect this matter, let's argue that it's real for the sake of argument. If we cannot detect it, that implies it doesn't work in the same way our stuff does, or at least simply implies we can't impose what we understand about visible matter on dark matter. Yet all of these patches are just dark versions of normal matter. That's a huge leap in logic, and makes the whole concept seem more inherently fantastical. This patchwork has created shadows for its shadows, and we gawk at them all. Another one we gawk at is dark energy, another patch. For a while, science thought that gravity would eventually pull the universe back together in what they called the Big Crunch, the opposite of the Big Bang. This is once again based on our flawed models of gravity, and the opposite happens. The universe is expanding at an increasing rate, an exponentially increasing rate, and it shows no signs of slowing, it's only speeding up. This again does not make sense within our equations of gravity. We are so obsessed with our equations of gravity being right. So what do? We invent dark energy, a force we can't detect, we can't see, and supposedly makes up 68% of the universe. Now, with all this combined, the way math works, dark matter and dark energy comprising 95% of all tangibility, and yet it's completely intangible, undetectable. I'm not going to try to explain the expansion of the universe here. But will I note the artifact here? The patch of dark energy to explain a mechanism that we don't understand that breaks our model of gravity. It's important to notice patterns when they appear, my dear viewer. So now let's talk about dark flow, the thing that makes dark energy not make sense. The Great Attractor. Something in space is pulling our galaxy and many others towards something. We can't see it. Note the pattern? We can't see it. We can't detect it except through the fact that galaxies seem to be moving in this direction. And yet, we label it as dark flow. And it contradicts how dark energy is supposed to be making everything move around. Once again, our jokester friend Donnie Darko making things move in strange ways that we don't understand. So, we invent more patches. We invent more of the universe to make our broken gravity equations work. There are other things we label as dark. Dark radiation, for example, because we can't explain it. There will likely be things in the future with the label dark. And there's many other various things with many other various labels that we've either compartmentalized for the sake of preserving the equation, in other words, la la la, I don't hear you, or we just invent more patches. Occam's razor, though, my dear viewer, Occam's razor. What is a more simple explanation in this situation? Ask yourself that. And ask yourself this. If we were to analyze this from a purely statistical standpoint, what would the odds actually be of an incomplete equation leading to a complete understanding, unless somehow everything that we don't know about it is completely irrelevant to our understanding? Now, I'm not going to crunch the numbers, but I don't think I need to crunch the numbers for us to intuit that the odds are slim. So just from that logic alone, we have to reassess. With all that in mind, my dear viewer, I would postulate a thought experiment, one I call the Underpants Gnome Theorem. The Underpants Gnomes were a group of gnomes from South Park who had a business plan. Steal underpants. Step 1, steal underpants. Step 2, unknown. Step 3, profit. And if we compare that to modern physics and the leaps they're making, we might find that the Underpants Gnome had a little bit better scientific method. You see, the thing about the gnomes is they had proof for the existence of underpants. But what do physicists have? They have an incomplete gravity equation. Equating it to underpants, they would be full of holes and threadbare at best. So already the Underpants Gnomes have the physicists beat. With step 1, they know for sure of the existence of the total, complete underpant. They have a full framework for underpants. They know they lie within the underwear drawers of the sleeping citizens of South Park, ripe for the picking. Now, with step 2, it is notable, and they do acknowledge that they do not know what step 2 is. It's a series of question marks. It's a mystery. But they are certain if they complete step 2, that step 3, profit, is achievable. The gnomes are honest in their lack of knowing of step 2. Now compare this to the physicists. Step 2 in this should be broken equation, fix equation. Instead, step 2 is like, we're going with it anyway. At least the gnomes were honest. So, step 3, profit. How do the gnomes get there? They don't know, I don't know. But the step 3 is profit. Well, step 3 in the physicists is 95% invisible, intangible universe that we cannot detect. And at least the gnomes didn't invent 95% of an invisible universe. They were honest that they didn't know step 2. They knew that underpants were real. For sure. Exactly as they understood them. So if we live in a world where the business plan of a cartoon gnome to profit off of underwear is more sound than the logic of the dark sector, yeah, that's an inherent problem. It's a funny problem, but it's also a problem that physicists are dedicating their whole lives to, that billions of dollars are being poured into. So much effort chasing the ghosts of math and the shadows of an incomplete theory. At least the gnomes knew the underwear for sure existed. They did not have an incomplete model for underwear. I wonder if any of them actually modeled the underwear. But I digress. The darkest thing about the dark sector is the fact we're chasing shadows.